Welcome to Troublesome Terps, the podcast about topics that keep interpreters up at night. Oh, Alex?
Yeah, sorry. On the other hand, that was a very good introduction.
I agree, although maybe you could try it a little bit quicker.
Yeah, and maybe emphasize the title just a wee bit more.
Guys, really? Okay. This is indeed Troublesome Terps, the podcast about the things that keep interpreters up at night. And as you might have guessed, we are talking about feedback. I'm Alexander Gansmeyer, and with me here in our virtual studio is our usual dynamic duo. First up, his advice is always sound, Alexander Drexel.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind. Maybe the feedback puns are a bit on the nose, but I like them. Jonathan wrote them.
Let's blame Jonathan, because as always, he's in the loop. Jonathan Downey.
Thank you. My middle name is Dr. Pun. It got a really strange look from the registrar when I tried to change it. There we go.
They let you do everything now with your passport after Brexit. Anyway.
Oh, don't mention that word.
Don't mention the B word. Thanks for the introductions, Alex. But we have one more person to introduce, which is our guest for tonight's show, Aline Casanova. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. And we figured you'd be a very good guest to have on the show for the topic of feedback, which we've been wanting to cover for a while. And you're in the middle of a very big project, which is called InterpretimeBank. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself first, Aline?
Well, I graduated from the Master's in Conference Interpreting at the University of La Laguna, but before that, I was a dance major. So the whole issue of deliberate practice and feedback was very, very important in my life.
Excellent.
Really. And I'm currently based in Madrid, but I worked for a couple of years in Geneva. I am an accredited freelance interpreter at the United Nations in Geneva.
Excellent. So how did you make the switch from dancing to interpreting, if I may ask?
It really all came down to money, Alex. It is very hard to make ends meet as a dancer. And as I was getting older, I was looking for basically a new career, a new professional pathway. So it took many, many years because, first of all, I had to learn a third language. And I had to get a lot of information and, look at what my options were at the moment. And finally, I was able to go to La Laguna. But from one profession to another, it took me about 10 years to be able to make the switch.
The next question that I have, Aline, for you is, can you tell us a little bit about the other people that are on the InterpretimeBank project? Yes,
the InterpretimeBank team is a group of 5 wonderful young women. We all graduated from La Laguna at the same time, so that's where we met, and really that's where the idea started brewing. Their names are Lia Giralt, Nuria Campoy, Ana Galet, and Monica Diaz Casariego. We are all based in different cities, in different countries all over Europe, and we have been working on this project for 4 years now, or a little bit more than 4 years.
And this cooperation was a result of you studying together? Is that how that happened? Okay.
Yeah, basically, because, La Laguna is in the Canary Islands. And so we all finished our masters and we all left. Yeah. We all went to different parts of the world, trying to find a job or trying to see what our next professional move was going to be. So we realized very quickly that if we wanted to make it into the market at some point, we needed to keep up our skills. And it was really hard to get those skills. The master's was hard. So since we were spread out in different parts of the world, and by that I mean Germany, Russia, Morocco, the UK, or Mexico. I went to Mexico right after the master's. Really, the only way to do it was to meet online.
That's right. Before we move deeper into the project, I'm a little bit curious about you, Alex and Jonathan, and about the kind of feedback that you got at university, and whether you or your teachers, I think, or trainers ever addressed how to give feedback, or was it more like learning as you went along? Do you recall that at all, how that went?
So there's two things going on in my head. One is when it came to feedback in university, I think it was generally good, but it was generally on the level of, here's things to do to improve. I remember that we tended not to hear things like, that was a really, really good speech. Certainly I've learned over time to use what they call the sandwich technique, which is you put little negative things in between two positive things. At university, I think because my impression of interpreter training in a lot of places is they deliberately make it a pressure cooker. And certainly in some ways that was true in the masters I did. And so I don't think any of us expected to get pats on the back, but we never really got any pats on the back if we did expect them. And there was never any specific sessions about giving and taking feedback. And I don't know about anyone else, but whenever I ask my boothmate for feedback, they look at me like I'm sort of strange. Why would you want feedback? You obviously did. You occasionally get the other interpreter going, good job, but that's about as far as it goes. And when you get, it's usually because the speaker's been an idiot, not the interpreter.
Yeah.
That's very true, yeah. I actually agree. It's kind of rare nowadays to get feedback from other interpreters, but at university, we didn't have any particular classes to teach us how to give or take feedback, but we would give feedback to each other. So there would always be certain classes where we would, interpret mostly consecutively because then everybody could hear it. And then we would kind of critique is maybe the wrong word, but nudge us in the right direction as to, how to posture yourself, how to speak, how to gesture or not gesture. So those kinds of things we did on a regular basis. And I think that kind of helped in giving critique, but eventually we all kind of got numb and we were just saying, you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, because it's kind of like a weekly exercise that we did, and then you just get used to it.
I think, this is one of the things I wanted to ask you about InterpretimeBank, Aline. Interpreters aren't necessarily used to giving positive feedback. We're quite good at telling each other, you need to change your lag, you need to do this, blah, blah, blah. Have you managed to do anything to help interpreters learn to be nice to each other?
Well, teaching someone to be nice to someone else is what I'm trying to do with my son. But we do have a set of guidelines that are available and you can download and more or less figure out how to give feedback. And from the very beginning, when we created the community, there was a document that explained the rules. And in those rules, we kindly asked people to be nice to each other, to be punctual, to respect their commitments. It should go without saying, right? But sometimes when you're working online and you have someone at the other end of the world that might run into traffic and might miss the appointment, right, it is just a nice reminder to tell them, someone at the other end of the world is waiting for you.
Yeah.
To listen to you. In terms of being nice, the sessions
Fingers
are private.
crossed.
Yeah.
Fingers crossed. When a person requests feedback and someone else responds, we do not monitor those sessions. We're not there listening in.
Yeah. We can get into a little bit more detail on how that works in a minute, I think. But I wanted to address something else first, which is there seems to be kind of that's my impression. There seems to be a big break that happens once we graduate, because as you all said now, and I had a similar experience, is we're actually very open with giving feedback and maybe quite harsh when we are still students. Quite harsh. And we had this practice group as well, so it was not just in class, but it was also just among peers. When we gave feedback to each other, we were quite open. But I'd like to believe that we got quite good at giving feedback, because we then also knew, the weak points and the strong points in our peers.
That's right.
And that seems to change once we graduate. And then at least my impression is that, when we make a living working in the booth, the whole feedback thing kind of goes away. And it seems like, unless I guess you have a very close boothmate that you know very well, you don't really do that. You don't really give feedback to each other, neither positive or negative. Is that a wrong impression, or do you feel similarly about that?
I was asked once, I have my favorite boothmate, and I said to her once, what did you think of that? And her answer was, if you weren't still good, I would stop working with you. End of feedback.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And I've actually said to interpreters, about, I used to try, I still need to get back to it, but I used to have a practice plan, and someone said to me, if you still need to work on interpreting, does that mean that you shouldn't be taking work?
Yeah.
And I thought, this is right on the button of where the problem lies. I'm sure we all know, and lovely Elisabeth Tiselius found that certain staff interpreters were getting worse.
Yeah.
It's not that they're bad interpreters. It's not that we need to howk them out and never let them work again. It's because if you don't have a feedback system and you don't have a deliberate practice system, you're probably getting worse. End of.
Aline, I see you having nodding heavily, so feel free to chime in.
No, I agree. And in addition to that, I have to say that in my experience, it was very difficult to get a good number of working days to feel that I was getting experience and getting good at anything. Mm-hmm. And then there's another question. How many days a year do you need to get better? I don't know. Has there been a study done on that? And will you even get better if you get, 50 days of work a year, or 150? Perhaps not, because you are not practicing. You're giving a service to your clients, and it's not the same thing. And I don't think your clients should be paying you to practice anyway. You should do your practice on your own.
That's another point. Yeah. But I think that's what you were referring to, Jonathan, right? With Elisabeth's study, she found out that a cohort of interpreters that work an awful lot, i.e. Interpreters in the European institutions, do not necessarily get better just because they work a lot. Some may even get worse over time. So I don't know what kind of parameters she used to sort of evaluate or measure the quality, but apparently that's what she found out. It's not just a function of how much work you do. You don't necessarily get better. So we might want to get into the whole thing of deliberate practice at some point. But Jonathan, did you want to say something more? Is there any other research about this?
That's the one I know now. That research has become complicated, and this is a whole related subject. Actually, a couple of years ago, I heard of research from Verla Duflo on how people become professional interpreters in the European institutions, and her argument was, notwithstanding what Elisabeth found, what's really important is the fact that the interpreters in the European institutions learn about the equipment and the procedures and stuff, and that's as much part of being a professional as your delivery. So it's not that she said it didn't matter, she just said that perhaps we're not wide enough in our view. You can argue back and forth about that, but I do think there's something that psychologists call metacognitive awareness, which is the awareness of how you're doing your job and what you need to do your job. And I have, because of the market I'm in, I don't hit lots and lots of days a year at the moment. It's annoying, but there we go. But by the same token, because of the work I do in other areas and other ways that I get to practice and help myself grow, I think I'm now a far better interpreter than I was 2 years ago, even simply because I'm now far more aware of what I'm doing when I'm interpreting. And I'm now much better at making conscious decisions because I've learned things about client expectations, about what an event actually is. And all of this stuff means that I can prepare better. And I believe I can give a better service because my metacognitive awareness is there, much more than it was 2-3 years ago. And so this is the thing. If we could get interpreters into deliberate practice and get them into deliberately growing their metacognitive awareness, I think we'd be on to a winner. At the moment, I don't know if Aline would agree with me, but I think at the moment, many interpreters, I daren't say most, but many interpreters view as, I'm working, so I must be good enough.
Yeah. Or they may be saying, you and I have so much work, I have no time for deliberate practice. I don't know about that. But just a quick question for you, Alex, if I may, because I know you have a few boothmates that you're quite close with. So is there any feedback happening there, if you want to share, of course?
There's one boothmate that I asked for feedback. Just because I was curious, because we'd never talked about it, and I said that much. I was like, we've never talked about this, so I'm just curious. What do you think? Yeah. What would you change? And there's another boothmate whom I constantly give feedback to, but she's great, and I love working with her, and she's really great. But she constantly down talks herself. She's always like, "Oh, that didn't really go well. Oh, I think that really was very difficult." And so I'm always like, "No, that was great. You did a great job." So I kind of try to uplift her and like encourage her. But that's kind of like as far as it goes. There was one instance which I didn't like. Let me just say that ahead of time, where I got feedback from an interpreter in another booth who on her shift was basically just clicking through the different booths, and then she just came in, and my boothmate and I, we were both, you know, working really well together, but she had a much different style of interpreting than I did, just, you know, based on the intonation, based on the delivery. And then that colleague from the other booth, she came in the break and she said, I much prefer how she does it over how you do it, like in front of both of us.
Wow.
And she's like, maybe you should work on sounding a little bit more like her. And I was thinking, first of all, the nerve, and second of all, maybe I don't want to sound like her. Maybe I like how I sound, you know? So I think that was a bit much. And then I kind of laughed it off and shrugged it off. But I think that's kind of an example of how to yeah, exactly. I think that's kind of an example of how to not do it. Possibly. I don't know. Aline, what do you think?
I am not sure I would take a comment like that very well myself.
Right?
Yeah, because when I'm in the booth, I'm focused on something else. I'm focused on delivering a service, right? I'm trying to help communication happen in the meeting. And hopefully, by the time I get into the booth, I already did my preparation and my research, and I practiced the phrases that I always trip with, and did my glossary research, and with luck, I got to practice a speech that I think will be useful or related to the topic I will be working in beforehand. And that's when I would want to hear everything that should be improved. But in the booth, I think that could throw me off. I don't know. Then again, I have gotten like specific feedback of things I should improve in the booth from a colleague who does it in a very professional and polite way, and I appreciate it very much. But to be fair, she waits until the end of the meeting and tells me, if I may, could I suggest that you do this and this and this, and I cut this, and if you don't want me to say these things to you, I'll stop. But if you do, here they are. It's a way to do it.
I think as well, I was working with a new colleague who spotted that I got the formation of a certain word in a certain tense wrong, and that's great because then next time I'm not going to do it again. It was just I was in a rush and I got it wrong. It's fine. What's harder to give feedback on, and in a way just as important, is the way people act in the booth. So, you know, it's one thing for someone to say, do you realize you got that tense slightly wrong? And that's great. I can improve on it. But sometimes you might want to say to a colleague, and I've only had this happen kind of once or twice, do you realize the way that you act in the booth makes it more difficult for your booth mate to do their job? And that's much harder to give feedback on. But on the other hand, those kind of issues can become really bad niggles that make things a lot worse. You know, silly example, I know I heard a story of one interpreter who decided that they wanted to eat a really, really stinky cheese after the assignment and hung it up on the coat rack in the booth. Really horrible thing.
Oh my God.
But, you know, in our profession, how many interpreters would go, if you smell like that, I'd be doing this job on my own. You know?
Even if I'm not supposed to, yeah.
I'd much rather an hour of chuchotage than a smelly cheese hung up on the coat rack.
Yeah. What I wanted to ask about is, and maybe we can get a little bit into the guidelines, Aline, that you have for InterpretimeBank, which I'm not familiar with. What are good strategies to decide, first of all, on what you should give feedback on? Because, I mean, there can be several elements of interpreting that you could sort of critique, as it were, or give feedback on. So, you know, delivery accuracy, how you speak, how you behave in the booth, and so on and so forth. Is there anything on that in the guideline, or anything that you would comment on?
I am very glad you asked that question. Well, first of all, since InterpretimeBank is an online community, we cannot really get feedback on how other people behave in the booth because we don't know.
Yeah.
We're not there together. We can't see them. However, it is, I think, crucial that when you request someone's time for them to listen to you and give you feedback, you should have some idea of what you need to work on. And I think that if you have been through proper training, or if you have a certain amount of experience in the market, you probably know what you need to improve. And I say probably, because we all have our blind spots. So having said this, is really an important thing to go into your practice session with some objectives in mind. We encourage not to have like a whole list of goals to improve in one speech, but maybe focus on 2 or 3 aspects that you want to work on. And that way, the person who is listening to you can give you feedback that would be useful. Because if you're working, let's say, on décalage or on intonation or in precision, then the other person can be watching out for that and maybe give you some other general comments. Or, I don't know, if you're having problems with your tenses or with finding synonyms, the other person is looking out for that. Once again, they can not only pinpoint the problem, hopefully, but also give you some good strategies to try and fix it.
That, I think, is already very advanced feedback if you can not only just mirror the issues or talk about or point out the problems, as it were, but that you can already provide strategies to address them. I think that's actually what makes a good interpreting trainer or interpreting teacher. If you can provide that as a colleague or as a peer, that's great. And it just occurred to me, we didn't really say actually what InterpretimeBank is, because we just took it as a given. Do you want to do that real quickly?
Yes, the basic idea behind InterpretimeBank is, on one hand, to have a time bank in which people in which we will exchange time for time. I will listen to you, and then someone else in the community will listen to me and give me something very valuable, which is feedback. And we're able to give this feedback because we have acquired certain skills through training and through experience. Where does it happen? Well, InterpretimeBank is an online community. Right now, we are still functioning on Google+, on that social network. But as you know, Alex, we are finishing up the custom-made platform to make all this easier. And the way this is going to work is that the members that decide to come over to the new platform will create a profile in which they will indicate their language combination, their name, and some other information that is requested. Not all of it is mandatory. And then what the platform will do is that it will help you find other people that have a similar language combination that could give you feedback, so that you can find potential practice partners very easily without overwhelming everybody in the community with messages or with emails whenever there are notifications. So that's the idea. Now, the InterpretimeBank is not an open community. There is a selection process to join. So, for example, at this point, it is not open to undergrad students, for example.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
It's open to students of master's degrees and to professionals with proven experience.
I think that's an interesting take, because certainly my impression has been that the further interpreters get into their career, the less open they seem to be to receive feedback. Yeah. And yet there seems to be a suggestion in Elisabeth's work, and perhaps his other work as well, that when we really need feedback the most is not when we're starting out and we have this support group around us of lecturers and peers and so on, but when we're out in the market on our own, if you're a freelancer, and just having to get on with it. We've kind of done a good job of creating an interpreting community of practice in some ways and not in others. Have you found any reactions from professionals to the idea? Have any professionals gone, I don't need that? How have the professionals reacted, Aline?
We've had mixed reactions. Some of them are very happy to have found something like that, because once they start working, it becomes very difficult to perhaps take courses every so often. It is very difficult to balance your work life with your family life, and on top of it, with more practice to get better. So for some of them, it has been very positive, but it is true that some other professionals do not want to be heard by potential colleagues or recruiters or what have you. I don't know. I think it takes humility to be able to put yourself in that situation and take feedback from peers. So yeah, we have had both ends of the spectrum, I should say. But this is, you sign up if you want to. No one is forced.
No one is forced to do it.
Nope.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess technically as a recruiter myself, I can understand the reticence, and in a way I would be reticent as well, but as much because of my language combination as anything else. Let's not go down that road. But I think, so my policy as a consultant is, when I'm building a team, I either take people who I've already heard or who are recommended by those who I've heard, and that's it. And so for if I was practicing in InterpretimeBank and I was saying, I want to work on my public speaking skills in French, and I'm swapping with someone who's working on their English, if I find out they're a blinking amazing interpreter, they're going to get more work. That you can't lose work that you never had in the first place. And I think this is it's an interesting model, and it's a model that when I first heard of, I thought, not sure what I think of that, but actually it makes a lot of sense. How much would you have to pay another interpreter to coach you? I have no idea. But yeah, this idea of swapping and the humility of saying, well, we're practicing together, I think makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah. We're starting a little bit to collect arguments, I think, for sort of working interpreters on why it would make sense for them to be part of one of these initiatives, InterpretimeBank being one of them. So it would be, first of all, this sort of sense of humility, as you just put it, Jonathan, which I kind of like, that even if you have a lot of work and you're well established on the market, you probably, you surely still have things that you can work on, things that you can improve in your target languages, in your source languages, whatever. Are there any other arguments for sort of seasoned interpreters to maybe motivate them to join one of these platforms? I mean, I guess one could be that if you give your time and you give feedback to younger colleagues as well, that's just one way of giving back to the profession, as we like to say, or maybe, help young interpreters getting a good start. Can you think of anything else?
When you're adding a new language combination, even if you're a very seasoned professional already, this is a nice, safe environment where you can try out. And I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. And that can be a sort of a strange experience when you add a new language. And I mean, you don't really start from scratch, but you start sort of at a lower level necessarily because it's a new language. Jonathan, yeah.
There's a couple of things. One, I think it's probably likely to combat brain rot. This feeling of, for example, I've done quite a few fisheries jobs, and if I was to do deep sea fishing on a regular basis, the likelihood is I would get into a rut. And then if I got a job in nuclear power, I would go, how do I adjust to a new setting again? Yeah. If you've got, especially if you've got a job coming up and you think, right, I need to practice this. If I had a sales conference coming up, I would want to sit down with other interpreters and go, right, let's hammer out my French public speaking skills because this is going to be really important in this job. If you've changed environments, even if you're just scared enough of getting worse to want to practice. And I think the last thing is, if I went to a doctor and the last time they'd done any updates to their training was 20 years ago.
Oh boy.
Yeah, exactly. We wouldn't accept from a medical professional that, they're still thinking that it's a good idea to shove leeches up our nose to cure a cold. Anyone ever did that. But, if we went to a doctor and they were still using ideas from 20, 30 years ago, we would go somewhere else. So our client should expect the same of us. Yeah. That we've been working on our skills and updating them and practicing, not, last decade, but at least some point in the last year. If not, then we're asking our clients to put a whole lot of faith in us, far more faith than we'd put in almost any other profession.
Yeah, although some interpreters might say, well, I do CPD, but I do it for, my field of expertise. And we're very much talking about languages and interpreting technique, which is a bit different, I think. But so looking at the sort of other target group, I think for initiatives like this and for InterpretimeBank, i.e., students or budding interpreters, I think the advantages there are pretty obvious for them. But is there anything that we haven't quite thought about? I mean, could this be used to extend your network almost? Is this almost like a networking thing? I
was about to say that.
Okay.
I have noticed that it creates bridges. Mm-hmm. It has been my personal experience that when I work with colleagues from Latin America, I have worked with colleagues from Argentina, Peru, and Mexico so far, given the language combinations. We usually start by wanting to know more about each other and to know about our markets and how things work and how clients react to us and what are the professional associations that they belong to and what are their issues, the issues that they are facing. And I have found that very enriching.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very enriching. And then at some point, I have been able to recommend people in cases where perhaps it's not as easy to find or to recruit interpreters if you're in very, very different parts of the world. And I have had people ask me, hey, do you know of anyone here and here? And I have been able to say, actually, I do. And and it's very strange. It's like, why would I know anyone in Peru? Well, because I practiced with them once. What I do is that first I ask that colleague if I may give out his or her contact information, and then I proceed, and then whatever happens. But in any case, I have had very enriching conversations.
I think also, if you're practicing with someone, you realize that they're not faultless either. There's something about building a network. I wouldn't be surprised if people end up referring jobs, like you just said. I wouldn't be surprised if people start learning. We were talking on the last episode about the importance of socialization into the profession. And for newer interpreters, and perhaps for older ones that came through a different route, I could see practicing being a very good way of socializing them into norms, into the way that you approach a mission, the way that you approach different strategies. That kind of socialization, although it's going to be more gentle and more subtle, I think that could happen a lot through practice. So, if I was working on my public speaking and someone said to me, in French, you can really just drop that and it will sound better. That's socialization. That's norm building. That's strategy building. It would be lovely to see kind of some scientific studies on what happens when you're practicing with people. Do you end up interpreting in the same way? Is this a way that we're kind of building into community norms? But it's really fascinating that you could go into work on your interpreting technique and come out having learned a whole new approach to interpreting.
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any research. There certainly should be, because there are quite a few of these initiatives now, and I wanted to touch on one thing that I noticed. So, for example, another very sort of well-known initiative is WISE, which is different because it happens in real life. So people get together in one spot to give each other feedback and to give speeches to each other. So it's usually in Brussels or in Valencia. So I'm wondering if, Aline, if you have seen in your work on InterpretimeBank any difference in how people give feedback sort of in real life, which you've experienced yourself, as you said, and online, because there's lots of articles now about how people react differently sort of online on social media when you don't face a person directly. Although I think you're working with video chat, right? So that may be different. So, but I'm just wondering if that's a thought or a discussion you've had.
We have. We tried to work on video, and we encourage to have the feedback done live. However, since time is an issue for many of the InterpretimeBank members, sometimes what they do is that they record their speech, they send it to the partner, and then the partner records the feedback back or writes an email or whatever. From what I've seen and heard, and from what people have told me, it tends to be very polite. But the preferred method definitely is video. It's to have a live conversation. I have done the WISE workshop, and I can tell you that one main difference between being on video conference and being live is that sometimes people take a lot longer to give you feedback when they're online.
Okay.
I have had almost an hour-long feedback session with colleagues. It was very useful.
Wow.
I say it was very useful, but I don't think that would happen live. It's never happened to me. No one has ever given me feedback for an hour.
Maybe you'd have to do it in a pub somewhere. And then you talk about life in general after that.
I was going to say it depends how much coffee is there.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that I was going to ask is, InterpretimeBank is basically is mainly there to create feedback, but it seems like it has a potential to create relationships as well. I'm not talking romantic ones. Have you found kind of people sending you feedback and saying, actually, I've kind of found a new friend, or, I've grown closer to my colleagues? Is there kind of some social benefit that they're finding out of this as well as growing as an interpreter?
Definitely. it has happened to me. I have found new colleagues, but I have also found people that call me to ask me for advice in their career, and I feel very honored that people think I could give valuable advice, but I have done the same in turn. I have called people to ask them, hey, what would you do? Please tell me, give me some advice. So yeah, I think it has the potential to create relationships outside just the peer-to-peer feedback.
And I think you're also very timely with the project, because you mentioned earlier that you've been using the Google Plus service, which I think is going away at some point next year. So
yeah, it's not going
you got the timing right.
Yes.
I know it's difficult to platform without being able to see it, but can you just give us sort of broad strokes what the platform looks like, or the kind of features that it has?
I think you yourself probably know the platform better than I do at this point, because you did the
maybe, yeah. I did some beta testing. I have to disclose this, I guess.
Yes, I have to disclose it too. But let's see. You basically have to create a profile like in any other platform. An interesting thing is that you have to write in your A, B, and C languages. You have to give some information in terms of your professional background. There's a way to create an exchange with someone else. We call it exchange, meaning I'm asking for feedback on such and such language. I would like to work on this topic. You can be as descriptive as you want. And then there is a system of notifications, meaning that the people who match your language profile will receive that notification. And then you can say, okay, I will give you feedback. And then there's a way to schedule the time and the date. There will be a way to have that reflected on a calendar, and then eventually there will be a messaging system as well.
Wow.
Yes, we're going to release a first version. It's going to be a simpler version, and then the idea is to add features to it. But then first we need to see how it works, how we can migrate all the members that we have now into the new platform, etc.
I mean, I heard of InterpretimeBank back when you were doing fundraising for it. And it really surprised me how quickly it seemed that the community got behind it.
Yeah.
Historically, and a lot of other tech people say this, historically interpreters aren't the most, they aren't the biggest fans of new platforms and new techs. I'm being diplomatic now. But it seems like you found an audience that went, actually, that's an idea that we need, and we're going to jump on board. Did the fundraiser just take off really quickly, or was it a case of kind of winning people over to get money out of their pockets?
No, I have to say that we had a lot of help from family and friends who believed in us and loved us very much and gave us their money. It was not all...
Jonathan was asking for the next live event, I suppose. Because we did a fundraiser as well. Yeah.
The next live event's happening in my living room.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. Yeah, no, so there was that. We had a lot of love money, let's say. But I think that the need we found, or we felt as recent graduates having to get into a very competitive market that seems to be shrinking, was shared by many other colleagues across the board. Definitely. So they did get back on that, and we also we had a very strong campaign, I have to say, on social media, and that helped. But definitely, we wouldn't have been able to make the target without the support from family and friends.
That's fair enough. Yeah. But do you think there's maybe a question to all of you as well? Do you think there's kind of a change in mood, perception, whatever? Because you just alluded to it, Jonathan, that interpreters traditionally have not been very embracing, let's say, new technologies. But there are quite a few platforms now. I mean, there's the speech repository from Skig, for example. There's Speechpool. There are some social media based groups. So there seems to be quite a momentum behind these platforms where you can upload video or give each other feedback. You're
right. That is definitely a thing. And it's definitely a thing for a certain part of the interpreting, not necessarily the market, but I don't want to make it into an age thing, but I definitely think there's a huge slice of the interpreting population out there who've never heard of, the speech repository, who wouldn't care if they did. Where at the same time, I think if you get them while they're young, there's a bigger chance that they're going to stick with it and also advocate for it. You know, whereas if you've already been in the market when the speech repository came out or InterpretimeBank came out, maybe you kind of missed the bandwagon on that one. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, I would agree with you. I've been chatting to people for a while now, actually since I started, probably halfway through the PhD, about what I saw as a cultural shift. In fact, I remember having a chat with a colleague once at an academic conference saying it feels like there's a demographic division in interpreting now. It's not necessarily an age thing. I know some older interpreters who are very down with the kids, but there is an attitude. Yeah, we got the Donald Duck laugh. There is an attitude thing going on. I'll give you a very quick example from when I did my training. We had 2 interpreters come in to do the pedagogical assistance thing. One, who I believe was a staff interpreter, one was a freelancer, but who still had very strong links to the institutions and to that market. And one of them came in and was such a down-the-line traditionalist, it kind of hurt. You know, it was kind of like if by halfway through your training you can't do Jacques Chirac, what are you even doing here, kind of thing. And the other person, who I must say was a lady and the other person was a gentleman, the lady who came in was incredibly supportive and understood the journey and could see shifts coming and was encouraging us to, you know, lean on each other and support each other and spend time with each other. And it struck me then, and it strikes me even more now, that there is kind of 2 camps in interpreting, as Alex said. There's the people who care about this stuff, who care about practice, who care about CPD, who care about, if you like, becoming a modern profession and being a business. And then there's the other people who probably are so comfortable and ensconced in what they have that they don't see the benefit. And if you have a perception, and I think there is a general perception in many places, that the market is shrinking, I would argue the market is moving rather than shrinking in most places. You know, when you're under threat, you tend to be more proactive. I think that's just how it goes. The people who think, you know, my clients will be with me until I turn 100, why would you convince them to practice?
Yeah.
But, you know, the people like me who feel like it's a knockdown, drag-out fight for every job, yeah, we're going to care. Of course we're going to care.
Yeah. Well, and I think personal development or developing your personal skills is very important too. So it's not, if it's not, maybe not going too well, I don't think it's only just about, well, I have to do more marketing or I have to market more aggressively or I don't know, that kind of thing. Maybe it's also an opportunity to improve your skills, work on your skills and that kind of thing. But the Jacques Chirac comment actually reminded me of something else that I wanted to talk about, is, Aline, do you have in your guidelines any tips about finding the right practice material, pitching the challenges at the right level so it's not frustrating, but it's also not too easy? Because I find that quite difficult, because I sometimes have to write speeches for training or for video recordings, and I find it quite challenging to pitch them to the right level, because when we say, well, please write us a 6-minute concept speech for an intermediate advanced student, that kind of thing. I find it quite difficult.
We do too. It is difficult.
Because it is. Yeah.
Because it is. We like the speech repository. We like Speechpool. Then we have a couple other tools that we put together. One is called the Topic of the Month, and the other one is the Speech of the Week. But these are not pedagogical speeches. The Topic of the Month is like a collection of speeches in different languages that address, let's say, current affairs, for example. No, and we have a pretty large collection right now. They are all on the Google Drive, and they are publicly accessible. And you can go in there and see the speeches, and they have more or less been selected to see if they're useful to work on simultaneous and consecutive or on-site translation. But they are not like separated in beginners, intermediate, and advanced speeches like you would find in the speech repository. That remains a difficult issue. There was an experience recently, which I like very much, and it is that another tool that we have is called the practice groups. And what we do is that we recruit a volunteer that will be like the coordinator of the group, and we help this person send around emails to recruit a group of people and coordinate them to give each other feedback and whatnot. And we had a young graduate from La Laguna volunteer to coordinate a group like this, and it was supposed to be a 1-week practice group. So they were going to do one speech and they were going to give each other feedback. And in the end, it turned out into a 6 or 7 week practice group because they were all into it. And I asked him, so how did you pick your speeches? And he's like, well, I don't know. I just looked on YouTube and, based on the previous feedback session, I would just look for something and propose it. And I always asked my peers that if they preferred to work in another speech that they knew for whatever reason to let me know. So, in that sense, it has encouraged communication to see as well what speeches can be useful and which ones aren't. But once again, it depends on your objectives. If you're starting out a master's, you're not going to be looking for the same kind of material than if you're preparing for an institutional exam, for example. You should be able to more or less address that by the time you finish your master's.
I'm coaching 2 interpreters at the moment as part of a research program, and it's interesting because they're British Sign Language and English interpreters, so they have a completely different combination to me. But the interesting thing is it's amazing how much you can work on monolingually. So we're talking about dealing with super fast speakers and dealing with speakers trying to be funny. And so I realized
one of our favorite topics.
Well, it's interesting because I was thinking, actually, there are exercises that you can do. I've got a colleague called Martin Jovchos, who is the king of exercises that are actually based on science. They're absolutely superb. He works on them with his wife, who's a speech therapist, so they break down things that could go wrong in your brain and how to fix them. But I realized that if they want to do humorous speeches, actually a good place to start is to shadow a monolingual one and then go back and say, what did the humor do in that talk? And it's this metacognitive thing that, if you're practicing interpreting a speech, your brain doesn't necessarily have the space to go, how did that speech fit together? And why was this joke there and not there? So there's a guy called James Veitch who for 2 years answered all of these Nigerian prince, I've got £1 million for you emails. Yeah. And he's got a TED talk on his experience, and it's hilariously funny.
It is, yeah.
But it's very, very clever because you realize that the humor in his talk as much comes from the pacing as it does from the fact that he got a spammer to call the bank a jelly bean and the lawyer a princess or whatever. It's insane, but it's funny because he knows how to stop. Something I'm not very good at.
Yeah, we'll need to put that in the show notes. It's very good material.
Yeah. And it's great practice material, whether you're doing monolingual or bilingual, because you're learning how to be funny. And if you decide, I've got a conference coming up and this speaker thinks they're a stand-up comedian, I need to learn how to be funny in the booth. We'll work on stuff that's funny and then work out why is it funny and then, practice doing that.
I'm glad that you qualified that remark because I heard you mention shadowing and I was reminded of a conversation with an eminent researcher we had the other day on Twitter who wasn't that convinced of the advantages of shadowing. But anyway, that's a topic for another day.
That's a whole other episode.
Yeah. So maybe to close the feedback loop, sorry for that pun. So to close the loop at this point, I wanted to get back to the whole idea of deliberate practice. I think we have had some ideas already, but maybe also as a motivation to get people to check out projects like InterpretimeBank and others. Do we have a few more things we can tell people about deliberate practice that may not yet be familiar with what that means? Aline, I think you had some things in the beginning. You said, for example, you pick one thing that you want to focus on during the session, but maybe there are some other tips as well that we can give people.
Can I take the liberty here to get back to my background as a dancer?
Of course.
it might be easier to illustrate it with an example.
Sure.
When I was very young, a long time ago, I had just started training in a very prestigious ballet school in Mexico City. And we had a teacher who was actually a professional dancer and a teacher at the National Ballet Company. And it was like a big deal to have him come in and teach his class. And he told us, look, I don't want you to come here and work hard. I don't care for you working hard. I need you to work smart. Because otherwise you will be coming and devoting hours and hours and hours of class to fossilize your mistakes. And that is not going to do you any service. So to me, back then, that was the first time I heard about deliberate practice without anyone using that name. But it really meant breaking down the skills or let's say breaking down a dance move, right? And seeing what were the steps for it, and seeing if you were doing them all right, and if you were not, to pinpoint the one in which you were failing, and then focusing on that through repetition, fixing it, and then seeing if the ensemble got better. And I saw that it did. I saw it time and time again. So in terms of deliberate practice and feedback, I would say that deliberate practice means to practice smart, to choose or to design exercises that you know that you need. Hopefully you got that during your masters, and your trainers were able to tell you more or less where you needed extra work, or maybe your peers can help you do that as well. So you have this design, this idea of an exercise in which you need to improve because you have a skill that needs to be polished. Then you come into your practice session with objectives, and you ask the person who will give you feedback to focus on that, and take it from there. Hopefully get a strategy coming out of that. And of course, there are two elements: repetition. You have to repeat it and do it as many times as you need until you get it right, and time.
And I also just wanted to quickly mention that there are a few good books out there containing exercises and some ideas for practicing interpreting. So notably from Andy Gillies, and I suppose there are a few others as well. And they are not only, I mean, they are intended for interpreting trainers, but of course, everybody who's interested in these books can just go out and read them and use them as inspiration. I don't know, Jonathan, if you have any books that you can recommend.
Is this going to be the Jonathan talks about his book clacks and getting any there? There is a chapter in my first book on CPD and on deliberate practice. I think I call it strategic CPD. I actually have a workshop now, which I do, which is hilarious because for a while people kept asking for the one workshop where I talk the least. I never did get the hint. And basically in that workshop, rather than me telling people anything, I do like kind of 2 minutes on checking that they understand what strategic CPD is. And then I spend the rest of the session asking them like 3 questions, and they work in groups together to design their own plan. Yeah. And I found out with that session very, very quickly that people were better. So I tried out a technique which I guessed would work, but I wasn't sure, in that I taught people the basics of research-style interviewing and got them to interview each other, and then on the basis of the interview to suggest, right, here's an idea for your strategic CPD plan, rather than having people sit at desk and go, I'm good at this, I'm not so good at this, what shall I do? They interviewed each other, and then out of the interview, the interviewer said, you've said this, this, and this. Have you thought about maybe trying this? And it's funny how much clearer you get, how much more clarity you get when someone interviews you than when you sit at a desk and go, what's wrong with me this month? Because it could just be you have a stomachache or a cold
or a flu, yeah.
Or a flu.
But this shows once again that really I think that the magic kind of happens when you talk with a peer and talk through things and get that feedback from somebody else. And I really like the phrase that you used earlier, Aline, about the fossilizing of mistakes. And it doesn't have to be mistakes. It can just be tics, or strange turns of phrases, all these kinds of things. So I'm really glad that we have projects out there like InterpretimeBank, and I really encourage people to try it out. I don't know, Aline, if you can or want to say anything about the next steps, or do you have any plans when you want to go public with this first version?
Fingers crossed.
I know it's always a difficult question.
It's always a difficult question because it depends on how the last stage of fixing bugs goes. But we are hoping we can do it before this year ends.
That sounds good.
And we're almost
great.
in November, right? So
yes.
I'm saying exactly the same thing about the first draft of my second book, so I completely understand you. Originally, I was going to get it finished before our 4th child arrived, and that didn't
work.
No. Does the story be?
No.
4 kids under 7.
Yeah.
Yes.
For those of you who aren't watching the video of this, I have like bags under my eyes that are large enough to deal with the British national debt after Brexit.
Now you're just fishing for compliments, Jonathan. Anyway,
See, I was going to say I'm definitely, now that I understand InterpretimeBank a lot better, I've been needing peer feedback. My fear is that I find a really mean peer who just says to me, and you've been getting work. So, when I join, can I ask that everyone be nice to the Troublesome Terps co-host, please?
You can.
I think that's in the guidelines anyway.
I hope so.
Be respectful. Yeah, it is in the guidelines.
Wonderful.
Be respectful to Scotsmen. It's a wonder we can even speak English.
Exactly. Okay, so I want to thank you, Aline, for taking the time to join us tonight for this very, very interesting conversation. I know it's difficult as a young parent, and Jonathan can relate as well, I assume. So we are going to let all the parents of young children go for tonight. Thanks once again. Thanks to my co-hosts as well, Alexander Gansmeyer and Jonathan Downey. And we'll talk to you next time on Troublesome Terps.
Thank you, gentlemen.
It's been fun.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Finishing at 9. Seriously? Scary.
Well, it's 10 over here.
It's 10.
Oh boy, I'm in so much trouble.
Yes.
What's that?
No, that's just for us.
Just for us.
Does that work better?
Oh my God.
3, 2, 1.